Commander Kang Ho stood on the bridge of his massive warship, watching the peaceful trading station float helplessly in space ahead of him. His red-painted fleet of 50 warships surrounded the small station like hungry wolves circling a wounded deer. The station was home to thousands of innocent traders and their families who had never hurt anyone in their lives, but that did not matter to Kang Ho. He was the most feared pirate commander in 3 sectors of the galaxy, and fear was his business. The Crimson Fleet had earned its name 20 years ago when Kang Ho first painted his ships with the blood of his enemies. It was not just decoration, it was a promise to anyone who saw those red hulls that death was coming. The fleet had destroyed entire colonies, burned whole planets, and left nothing but silence where once there had been bustling civilizations. No military force had ever been strong enough to stop them. No government had ever been brave enough to try. Today was supposed to be just another easy raid. The trading station had valuable cargo holds full of rare metals and exotic foods that would sell for millions on the black market. The station also had something even more valuable: hundreds of civilian hostages who could be sold to slave traders or used to bargain with their home governments. Kang Ho had done this same raid dozens of times before, and it always ended the same way with him: richer and his reputation more terrifying. His crew of Vex warriors moved around the bridge, preparing their weapons and laughing about what they would do to the civilians once they boarded the station. The Vex were natural predators with razor-sharp claws and teeth that could tear through steel. Their species had evolved on a world where only the most violent survived, and they brought that savage nature with them wherever they went. Kang Ho had recruited them specifically because they enjoyed killing as much as they enjoyed the treasure that came after tactical. Officer Namsu reported that all weapon systems were ready to fire. The station shields were pathetic civilian-grade barriers that would collapse after a few shots from their plasma cannons. The station had no weapons of its own and no military ships nearby to help them. It would be over in minutes, and then the real fun would begin as his crew boarded to collect their prizes. The communication officer Min Ji opened a channel to the trading station, and the desperate voice of the station administrator filled the bridge. He was begging for mercy, explaining that they were just peaceful traders who had done nothing wrong. He offered to give them all the cargo they wanted, if they would just leave the civilians alone. The pirates laughed at his pathetic pleas because they had heard the same desperate words from thousands of other victims. Kang Ho was about to give the order to fire when something impossible happened on the sensor screens. 3 small black ships appeared from nowhere, moving faster than anything should be able to move. They were sleek and beautiful, like deadly works of art, with no visible weapons and no energy signatures that made sense. The ships broadcast a message on all frequencies in perfect galactic standard, and the voice was calm and cold as winter on a dead world. You have 30 seconds to leave this system or face the consequences. The bridge erupted in laughter as the pirates looked at the tiny ships on their screens. 3 vessels that looked like they could barely hold a dozen crew members. Each were threatening 50 massive warships filled with the galaxy's most dangerous killers. It was like watching a mouse threaten an army of lions. The young warriors made jokes about how they would paint their ships with human blood and add another species to their collection of defeated enemies. But Kang Ho noticed something strange that made his laughter die in his throat. The older members of his crew were not laughing at all. Instead, they were backing away from their stations with looks of pure terror on their faces. The grizzled veterans who had fought in 100 battles and never shown fear were suddenly acting like frightened children. Engineer Hyun Woo, who had served on pirate ships for 40 years, was actually shaking as he stared at the 3 black vessels. The youngest crew member, Bo Ram, whispered a single word that made everyone on the bridge freeze in place. Humans. The word hung in the air like a curse, and suddenly, no one was laughing anymore. The stories came flooding back into their memories, the legends that older pirates told in quiet voices when they thought no one was listening. Stories of a species so violent and unpredictable that even the galaxy's worst killers preferred to run rather than fight them. Kang Ho had always thought those stories were just myths told by cowards to excuse their failures. Tales of humans who could walk through solid matter and kill with a touch of their hand. Stories of weapons that existed in 11 dimensions and soldiers who treated war like an art form. But looking at his crew's faces, he began to wonder if maybe those legends were more than just stories. The 30 seconds passed and nothing happened for a long moment. The three human ships just floated there in space, making no aggressive moves and sending no more messages. Kang Ho began to think that maybe the humans had realized how outnumbered they were and decided to flee like sensible beings. He was just starting to smile again when the impossible happened. All three human ships simply vanished from every sensor screen display and targeting system. His crew searched frantically using every type of scanner and detection device they had, but the advanced Vex technology showed absolutely nothing. The humans had disappeared as completely as if they had never existed at all, leaving no trace of energy signatures or hyperspace jumps or any sign that they had ever been there. Kang Ho was beginning to think the humans had fled in terror when his flagship suddenly went dark. Every light on the bridge died, leaving them in complete blackness before emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. The massive ship's engines stopped humming and the familiar vibration of the power systems faded to nothing, leaving them floating dead in space. Then Dalsu's voice came over the intercom, and the fear in the security chief's words made Kang Ho blood turn to ice. The man who had killed more enemies than anyone could count and had never shown fear in 30 years of combat was barely able to speak, so they are inside the ship. The bridge crew looked at each other with growing horror as they realized that somehow the humans had not only made their ships invisible, but had actually boarded their flagship without triggering a single alarm or detection system. They were trapped inside their own vessel, with an enemy they could not see, could not track, and could not understand. Kang Ho grabbed his personal weapon and tried to contact his other ships, but the communication systems were completely dead. Whatever the humans were doing, they had cut off the Crimson Fleet from each other, leaving each ship isolated. And helpless, the most feared pirates in the galaxy were about to learn why even galactic killers run when ruthless humans arrive. Security Chief Dalsu had fought in wars across 12 different star systems and killed more enemies than he bothered to count. His claws had torn through armor plating, and his teeth had crushed the bones of alien warriors who thought they could defeat a Vex in combat. He had led boarding parties against military vessels and never lost a single battle in 30 years of violence and death. But now, as he moved through the dark corridors of his own flagship, his hands were shaking like a coward. The emergency lighting cast everything in blood-red shadows, making the familiar hallways look like the inside of some alien predator's mouth. His team of elite warriors followed behind him, but they moved carefully and quietly, instead of with their usual aggressive confidence. They all knew that somewhere in these corridors were enemies they could not see or detect, and that knowledge made even these hardened killers nervous. The first bodies were found near the engine room, where 5 of his best fighters lay dead on the metal deck. Each one was a killing machine capable of tearing apart steel bulkheads with their bare claws, and strong enough to survive in the vacuum of space for several minutes. But they had been killed so quickly and silently that they never even had time to draw their weapons or call for help. What made the scene even more disturbing was that none of the bodies had any visible wounds or injuries. They looked like they had simply decided to lie down and die, but their faces were frozen in expressions of absolute terror, as if they had seen something so horrible that their minds could not handle it. Whatever had killed them had done it without leaving any trace of how it was accomplished. Warrior Young Min knelt beside one of the bodies and tried to scan it with his medical detector, but the device showed readings that made no sense. The warrior's heart had simply stopped beating at exactly the same moment as all the others, as if someone had thrown a switch that controlled their life functions. But there was no technology in the galaxy that could do such a thing remotely, and no weapon that could kill without leaving some kind of evidence. Dalsu tried to contact the bridge, but his communication device produced only static. The humans were jamming all frequencies using technology that was more advanced than anything in the Galactic Council's databases. They were completely cut off from the rest of the ship and had no way to know if Commander Kang Ho was even still alive. The ship's AI system was still partially functional, and it reported that life support was failing on Deck 7. When Dalsu's team reached that level, they found something that made even these experienced killers step backward in shock. Written on the solid metal wall as if carved by invisible fingers were words in perfect Vex script that said, "Your reputation ends here." The letters were burned into the steel itself, several inches deep, and still glowing with heat, but there were no cutting tools or energy weapons anywhere nearby. The message had been created by something that could manipulate matter at the molecular level without using any visible equipment. It was technology that should not exist according to everything they knew about the laws of physics. Communications officer Minji was trying desperately to contact other ships in their fleet, but she discovered that every vessel in the Crimson Fleet was being jammed by the same impossible technology. Whatever the humans were using, it was powerful enough to block communications across dozens of ships simultaneously, while remaining completely undetectable to their sensor systems on the main tactical display. Commander Kang Ho watched with growing horror as one by one his mighty warships went dark on the screen. Not destroyed or damaged, just silent, as if every crew member had simply decided to stop working at the same time. 50 vessels, each carrying hundreds of the galaxy's most dangerous pirates, were being neutralized by 3 small human ships that no one could even see on their scanners. The oldest member of his crew, Engineer Hyunwoo, approached the command chair with ancient data files that he had pulled from the ship's deepest archives. His face was pale with fear as he spoke in a whisper that barely carried over the sound of the emergency systems. "Sir, I found the old reports. The real ones from before the Galactic Council banned all mention of human military capabilities." Kang Ho read the classified files and felt his blood turn to ice water as he learned the truth about humanity that the galaxy had tried to forget. Humans did not just fight wars, they reshaped reality itself. During combat, they had weapons that could exist in 11 dimensions simultaneously, and soldiers who could phase through solid matter like ghosts. Their military doctrine was based on psychological warfare that left enemies so terrified they would surrender rather than face human forces in battle. But the most terrifying information in the files was about human philosophy regarding violence. They never fought simply to win battles or capture territory. They fought to send messages to anyone who might be watching. And the message was always the same. There are consequences for harming innocent people when humans are nearby. Those consequences were not always death. Sometimes they were much worse than dying. The tactical officer, Nam Su, reported that their ship's weapon systems were shutting down one by one, as if invisible technicians were carefully dismantling every gun and missile launcher on the vessel. The power cores were being drained in a controlled fashion that prevented any explosions or dangerous radiation leaks. It was precise technical work that showed the humans understood Vex technology better than the Vex themselves. Young Bo-Ram was monitoring the internal security cameras, and what she saw made her voice crack with fear as she reported to the bridge. The corridors showed impossible things. Armed warriors walking into rooms, but only their weapons floating out afterward as if carried by invisible hands. Engine rooms where massive machinery simply stopped working when shadows passed nearby. Medical bays where surgical equipment activated on its own, performing operations that no living being had requested. Dalsu realized with growing dread that the humans were not just killing his crew members. They were studying them, learning how Vex biology worked, how their weapons functioned, how their fear responses operated. Every dead pirate made the invisible hunters more efficient at killing the next group. They were being systematically analyzed and cataloged like specimens in some vast experiment. In the ship's armory weapons specialist, So Young tried to prepare defenses against an enemy she could not see or detect. She activated every scanner, every detection system, every thermal imaging device they possessed. For just a moment she thought she saw something, a heat signature in the shape of a person. But the temperature readings showed absolute zero, colder than the vacuum of space itself. Before she could react, all the weapons in the armory began taking themselves apart. Particle rifles broke down into neat piles of components. Plasma grenades had their explosive cores carefully removed and sorted by size. Even their most advanced energy weapons were disassembled with surgical precision, as if by invisible engineers who understood the technology better than its creators. Commander Kang Ho received a transmission from the trading station they had been about to attack. The station's elderly administrator spoke with gratitude. In his voice, "Commander, the human ships have told us that your fleet will be leaving soon. They wanted me to give you a message about the difference between pirates who steal cargo and those who murder innocents for entertainment. They said your education is about to begin. The message continued with words that made Kang-Ho hands clench into fists. The humans want you to know that the galaxy has room for criminals who take things that do not belong to them, but it has no room for those who kill families and children for fun. They said you need to understand this difference before you learn what real danger looks like. On the tactical display, more ships went silent as the invisible humans continued their impossible work. Each vessel that went dark reappeared moments later, broadcasting human identification codes and moving in perfect formation with the 3 black ships. His crew was being captured alive, his ships were being stolen, and his reputation as the galaxy's most feared pirate was being destroyed by enemies he could not fight because he could not find them. Chief Engineer Hunwoo stared at his computer screens in disbelief as he tried to understand what the humans were doing to their ship. The readings made no sense according to everything he knew about physics and technology. The humans were not using advanced stealth systems or cloaking devices to become invisible. Instead, they were doing something far more impossible. They were editing reality itself in real time. The ship's sensors were not failing to detect the humans because of some kind of jamming technology. They were failing because the humans were temporarily removing themselves from the physical dimensions that normal sensors could perceive. It was like they could choose which parts of reality they wanted to exist in, and which parts they wanted to ignore. The concept was so far beyond current galactic science that most species would think it was magic. Security footage from around the ship showed things that should not be possible. Corridors were heavily armed. Vex warriors walked into rooms, but only their floating weapons came out afterward as if carried by invisible hands. Engine compartments where massive machinery simply stopped functioning when shadows passed nearby. Medical bays where surgical equipment turned itself on and began performing precise operations that no living doctor had ordered. Dalsu watched the security recordings with growing horror as he realized the humans were not just randomly killing crew members. They were hunting with a purpose and a plan. Every death was carefully chosen and executed with surgical precision. The humans were learning how Vex physiology worked, how their weapon systems functioned, how their psychological responses operated under stress. In the medical bay, Dr. Yunha made a discovery that chilled her to the bone as she examined the bodies of the dead crew members. The warriors had not just been killed, they had been improved. Their corpses showed signs of medical procedures performed with impossible precision. Organs that had been damaged from years of combat were perfectly repaired. Genetic defects that should have caused death years ago were completely corrected. Old scars from battles were healed without leaving any trace. The humans were not just ending lives, they were showing mercy even in death. They were fixing damaged bodies as a final act of kindness, before stopping the hearts of pirates who had spent their lives causing suffering to others. It was a level of medical technology that could cure any disease or injury, but it was being used on corpses instead of saving lives because these particular lives were not worth saving. Navigation Officer Tae Min reported something that made Commander Kang-Ho's stomach lurch with fear. Their flagship was no longer under their control. The ship was moving toward the edge of the solar system, but not toward any known hyperspace jump coordinates. Instead, they were heading toward a region of empty space that did not appear on any galactic navigation charts where sensors showed nothing but cosmic void weapons. Specialists So Young discovered that every single weapon on their ship had been systematically dismantled by invisible hands that understood Vex military technology better than the engineers who built it. Particle cannons were taken apart into individual components that were sorted and cataloged like museum pieces. Energy rifles had their power cores removed with such precision that not a single atom of dangerous radiation was released. The most disturbing discovery came from Communications Officer Minji, who found that the humans had been intercepting and recording every transmission the Crimson Fleet had made for the past 6 months. They had detailed records of every colony the pirates had attacked, every innocent person they had killed, every act of cruelty they had committed across multiple star systems. The humans had been watching and waiting and planning. Young warrior Boram tried to access the ship's weapons locker, but found that the heavy security door had been opened without triggering any alarms. Inside, every single personal weapon had been carefully disassembled, and the components arranged in neat geometric patterns on the floor. It looked like an art installation made from instruments of death, but it was really a message that said your tools of violence no longer have any power. Here, as their ship continued moving toward the mysterious empty region of space, the void began to reveal its secrets. What had appeared to be empty vacuum was actually hiding something so massive that it defied comprehension. A structure the size of a small moon covered in weapon systems that could destroy entire solar systems, but completely invisible to anyone who did not already know it was there. The facility was a masterpiece of engineering that made reality forget it existed unless you were specifically looking for it. It was surrounded by defensive systems that could probably destroy entire fleets, but those weapons were not targeting the approaching pirate ships. Instead, they seemed to be welcoming them like a prison, welcoming new inmates. Commander Kang Ho realized with growing dread that the 3 small human ships had not been a random patrol or a chance encounter. They were scouts reporting back to a military installation that had been watching this region of space for years. The humans had not just arrived to stop one pirate attack, they had been cataloging every crime his fleet had committed and preparing for this moment. Dr. Yunha continued examining the dead crew members and found that each body showed signs of having been scanned by technology that could read memories directly from brain tissue. The humans were not just killing pirates. They were downloading their knowledge and experiences. They were learning everything about how the Crimson Fleet operated, how they chose their targets, how they coordinated their attacks. Communications officer Minji managed to intercept fragments of human transmissions, though her universal translator could only understand pieces of the alien language. The words she could make out were terrifying enough. Educational Protocol 7. Complete Behavioral Modification. Preserve core personality but eliminate violence pathways. Prepare for Rehabilitation Program 66 Alpha. The humans were not planning to kill the remaining pirates. They were planning to change them into something completely different. The facility ahead was not a military base or a prison. It was some kind of medical and psychological treatment center designed to transform violent criminals into productive members of society. And they were all going to be patients whether they wanted to be or not. Security Chief Dalsu found more bodies throughout the ship, but each discovery revealed new horrors. The dead pirates showed no signs of struggle or resistance. They had been killed by something so quick and efficient that they never had time to fight back. But their faces all wore the same expression of absolute terror, as if they had seen something so alien and incomprehensible that their minds simply shut down from fear. Engineer Hyunwoo discovered that the humans had installed some kind of neural monitoring devices throughout the ship. Invisible sensors that could read brainwave patterns and emotional states of every living person aboard the pirates were being studied like laboratory animals, while the humans learned everything about how their minds worked and what made them choose violence over cooperation. The massive hidden facility grew larger on their screens as they approached, and more details became visible. It was not just a building in space. It was an entire artificial world dedicated to the study and rehabilitation of violent criminals from across the galaxy. There were docking bays for thousands of ships, and what looked like residential areas where reformed pirates could learn new skills and find new purposes in life. As the Crimson Fleet ships were guided into the facility's docking bays by invisible tractor beams, Commander Kang Ho understood that this was not the end of their story. It was the beginning of something far more terrifying than death. The humans were going to take everything that made them dangerous pirates and replace it with something else. They were going to become new people whether they wanted to or not. The last thing Kang Ho saw before losing consciousness was a human figure materializing out of thin air on his bridge. A young woman in a simple black uniform who looked at him with eyes that held no hatred or anger, only a kind of clinical interest, as if he were a fascinating problem to be solved rather than an enemy to be destroyed. Chief Engineer Hyunwoo spent hours analyzing the impossible readings from his instruments, trying to understand how the humans had made themselves completely invisible to every detection system known to galactic science. The answer he finally discovered made his blood run cold with terror. The humans were not using any kind of stealth technology or advanced cloaking devices. Instead, They were using something far beyond the understanding of any other species in the galaxy. They were editing reality itself in real time, removing themselves from the physical dimensions that normal sensors could detect, while maintaining their ability to interact with the material world. The concept was so far advanced that it seemed like magic, but Hyun-woo instruments showed clear evidence that the humans possessed technology that could manipulate the fundamental structure of space and time. The ship sensors were not malfunctioning or being jammed. They were working perfectly, but they could only detect things that existed in the same dimensional framework as the equipment itself. The humans had learned how to step sideways out of normal reality while keeping one foot in the physical world so they could still touch and manipulate objects, but could not be seen or detected by anyone looking for them. In the medical bay, Dr. Yun-ha continued her examination of the dead crew members and made discoveries that challenged everything she thought she knew about biology and medicine. The pirates, who had been killed, showed signs of medical procedures that were impossible, according to current galactic science. Their bodies had been scanned, repaired, and improved at the cellular level by technology that could rewrite genetic code in real time. The most shocking discovery was that the humans had not just killed these crew members, they had actually improved their bodies before ending their lives. Organs damaged by years of violence and substance abuse had been perfectly healed. Genetic disorders that should have caused painful deaths were completely corrected. Scars from old battles were removed and replaced with healthy tissue. The humans were showing mercy, even to their enemies, providing medical care that could have extended these pirates' lives by decades or even centuries, but they were doing it after death as a final act of kindness before stopping hearts that had chosen to cause suffering instead of preventing it. It was medical technology that could cure any disease or injury in the galaxy, but it was being wasted on corpses because these particular lives were not worth saving. Navigation Officer Tae Min reported that every ship in the Crimson Fleet was now completely under human control. Their vessels were moving in perfect formation toward the massive hidden facility, but the pirates inside were still alive and conscious. The humans were not destroying their enemies. They were collecting them like specimens for some vast experiment in behavioral modification. Communications Officer Minji discovered that the humans had been monitoring every transmission the Crimson Fleet had made for over a year. They had detailed records of every innocent person the pirates had killed, every colony they had destroyed, every act of cruelty they had committed across dozens of star systems. The humans had been watching and cataloging their crimes while preparing for this moment. The intercepted human communications that Minji could partially translate revealed the true scope of what was happening. Educational Protocol 7 was not just about the Crimson Fleet. It was part of a galaxy-wide program to identify and rehabilitate violent criminals. The humans had similar facilities in other regions of space, and they were systematically working to eliminate piracy, murder, and terrorism throughout known space. Weapons specialist So Young found that every single weapon on their ship had been carefully disassembled by invisible hands that understood Vex military technology better than the species that invented it. But the components had not been destroyed or scattered. Instead, they were arranged in precise patterns that looked almost like art installations made from instruments of death. Message was clear. Your tools of violence are now decorative objects because you will never need them again. The humans were not just taking away their ability to fight. They were transforming weapons of war into symbols of a violent past that would soon be forgotten. Security Chief Dalsu discovered more evidence of the humans' impossible capabilities throughout the ship. Bodies of dead pirates were found in locations that should have been impossible to reach without triggering dozens of security systems. The humans had moved through their vessel like ghosts, passing through solid walls and locked doors as if they did not exist. But the most disturbing aspect of the crime scenes was that each dead pirate showed signs of having been studied while they were still alive. Brain scans that could read memories directly from neural tissue, medical examinations that cataloged every aspect of their biology and psychology. The humans were downloading everything these criminals knew about violence, tactics, strategy, and criminal organization. Young warrior Boram tried to access the emergency weapon caches hidden throughout the ship, but found that every single hiding place had been discovered and emptied. The humans had somehow known about secret compartments that even some crew members did not know existed. They had studied the ship so thoroughly that they understood its construction better than the engineers who built it. As the Crimson Fleet approached the massive hidden facility, more details became visible on their screens. The structure was not just a military base or research station. It was an entire artificial world dedicated to the study and transformation of violent criminals from across the galaxy. There were residential areas where reformed pirates could learn new skills, manufacturing centers where they could produce useful goods instead of causing destruction. Dr. Yun Ha realized that the neural monitoring devices the humans had installed throughout the ship were not just for surveillance, they were also treatment devices that could influence brain chemistry and thought patterns. The pirates were already being subtly modified as they approached the facility, their minds prepared for more extensive rehabilitation. Procedures Commander Kang Ho tried to contact other ships in his fleet, but discovered that while communication systems were working perfectly, his crew members could no longer think about coordinating attacks or planning violence. The neural inhibitors were already affecting their ability to organize aggressive actions while leaving their other mental functions completely normal. Engineer Hyun-woo found evidence that the humans had been present in this star system for much longer than anyone had realized. The hidden facility had been constructed over a period of several years, using materials and resources that had been slowly gathered from across the galaxy. The three small ships that had initially confronted them were just the visible tip of a much larger operation. The facility artificial intelligence system contacted their ship directly, speaking in perfect Galactic standard and explaining what would happen next. The Crimson Fleet crew would undergo 6 months of intensive rehabilitation that would eliminate their capacity for violence against innocent people while preserving their personalities and memories. They would learn new skills and find new purposes in life. The AI explained that this was not punishment, but education. The humans did not believe in permanent imprisonment or execution for crimes that could be corrected through proper treatment. The neural modifications would prevent the pirates from choosing violence in the future, but would not control their thoughts or emotions in any other way. They would still be themselves, just better versions of themselves. Communications Officer Minji intercepted more human transmissions and realized that similar operations were taking place throughout the galaxy. Pirate fleets, criminal organizations, terrorist groups, and other violent criminals were being systematically located and brought to rehabilitation facilities. The humans were implementing a galaxy-wide peacekeeping program that did not rely on traditional law enforcement. The most terrifying aspect of the human plan was its scope and efficiency. They were not just stopping individual crimes, they were eliminating the root causes of violence by transforming criminals into productive citizens. Their technology was so advanced that they could afford to be merciful, because no enemy was powerful enough to pose a real threat to their operations. As their ships were guided into the facility docking bays by invisible tractor beams, the pirates realized that their old lives were ending, but something new was beginning. They would emerge from this place as different people with different values and different goals. The humans were not destroying their enemies. They were creating new allies who would help spread peace throughout the galaxy. Security Chief Dalsu found the final piece of evidence that explained everything. A message carved into the ship's hull in letters that burned with their own light. We do not destroy those who can be saved. We do not abandon those who can be redeemed. We do not give up on those who can become better. The humans were not conquerors. They were healers operating on a galactic scale. The massive human facility was unlike anything the Crimson Fleet pirates had ever seen before. Inside the docking bays, their ships were held in place by invisible force fields that allowed the crew members to move freely around their vessels but prevented them from accessing any weapon systems or communication equipment that might be used to contact criminal allies outside the facility. Dr. Yun-ha was the first to understand what was happening to them when she tried to plan an attack on the human guards and immediately experienced a severe headache that made thinking about violence almost impossible. The humans had installed neural inhibitors in every member of the pirate crews, but these were not simple control devices that turned them into mindless slaves. Instead, they were sophisticated rehabilitation tools that caused physical discomfort whenever someone thought about harming innocent people. The devices did not prevent them from feeling anger or defending themselves if attacked, but they made it impossible to enjoy violence for its own sake or to plan attacks on civilians who had done nothing wrong. The inhibitors worked by monitoring brain activity and detecting neural patterns associated with predatory violence against helpless victims. When those specific thought patterns were detected, the devices would cause headaches, nausea, and other unpleasant sensations that encouraged the person to think about something else instead. It was psychological conditioning that worked at the neurological level. Communications officer Minji discovered that she could still think about fighting against armed enemies or defending herself from attack, but whenever she tried to imagine hurting defenseless traitors or their families, her head would throb with pain that made concentration impossible. The humans had somehow learned to distinguish between necessary violence and cruelty. For entertainment, Commander Kang Ho found himself in a conference room that existed, partially in normal space and partially in dimensions his eyes could not properly perceive. The walls seemed to shift and change as he looked at them, and the ceiling appeared to extend infinitely upward into a star-filled void that made no sense. According to the laws of physics, the human commander who met with him introduced herself as Captain Lee Nare, and she appeared to be a young woman wearing a simple black uniform that looked more like civilian clothing than military gear. But when Kang Ho looked directly at her face, he sometimes saw different people, different ages, as if she existed in multiple timelines simultaneously. Captain Lee explained that humanity had been monitoring pirate activities across this sector of the galaxy for several years using observation technology that made their surveillance completely undetectable. They did not object to criminals who stole cargo or cheated in business deals because such crimes did not cause permanent harm to innocent people. But they had a strict policy regarding individuals who murdered civilians for entertainment or profit. Such criminals received what humans called corrective education, which was designed to eliminate their capacity for violence against helpless victims. While preserving their personalities and memories intact, they would still be the same people, just better versions of themselves. The education process was comprehensive, but not cruel. Each pirate would experience selected memories from every innocent person their crew had killed over the years. They would feel the fear, the pain, the desperate hope for rescue that never came. They would understand on an emotional and psychological level what their actions had cost the galaxy in terms of lost, potential broken families, destroyed communities. But the process did not end with understanding their crimes. The humans also provided each pirate with extensive education in useful skills and knowledge that would allow them to make honest livings. After their release, weapons specialists would become engineers who designed defensive systems. Tactical officers would become exploration pilots who mapped new star systems for peaceful colonization. Ship commanders like Kang Ho would become transport captains who protected trade routes instead of attacking them. Their knowledge of pirate tactics would make them excellent at preventing the kinds of crimes they used to commit. Their understanding of criminal psychology would help them identify and stop other pirates before innocent people could be hurt. Security Chief Dalsu learned that his new role would be as a freelance investigator, helping local law enforcement agencies track down criminals across multiple star systems. His experience with violence would help him understand the criminal mind, but his rehabilitation would ensure that he valued justice over revenge. Engineer Hyun Woo would work for civilian shipyards, designing vessels that could escape pirate attacks rather than equipment that made piracy more effective. His proudest future achievement would be developing new types of escape pods that could automatically navigate to the nearest safe system when civilian ships came under attack. Dr. Yunha would operate a mobile medical clinic traveling to colonies that lacked proper healthcare facilities. She would use her knowledge of treating combat injuries to help accident victims and her understanding of different alien biologies to provide medical care across species barriers. The younger crew members who were most affected by the neural inhibitors reported that they did not miss their old lives of violence and cruelty at all. The devices made them realize that their previous enjoyment of causing suffering had been a kind of mental illness that prevented them from finding real satisfaction in life. Communications Officer Minji would work for the Galactic Trade Authority, coordinating rescue missions for ships in distress and helping to establish communication networks that would make space travel safer for everyone. Navigation Officer Tamian would join exploration fleets mapping new systems and discovering resources that could benefit all species. The rehabilitation program included extensive psychological counseling that helped the pirates understand why they had chosen lives of violence in the first place. Many had experienced trauma or abandonment that made them believe the galaxy was a hostile place where only the strong survived. The humans showed them evidence that cooperation and kindness were actually more effective survival strategies. Captain Lee explained that the neural inhibitors would be removed after 6 months of successful rehabilitation, but the education and new skills would remain permanently. The pirates would be released with their ships returned and given opportunities to start new careers that would provide both financial security and personal satisfaction. The most shocking part of Captain Lee's final statement was her policy regarding repeat offenders. If any of the rehabilitated pirates chose to return to killing innocents after their release, humanity would not provide education a second time. Instead, they would provide what the captain called justice. And her tone made it clear that justice was much less pleasant than education. Young warrior Boram asked what would happen if they refused to cooperate with the rehabilitation program. Captain Lee explained that cooperation was not required. The neural inhibitors made it impossible to harm innocent people, regardless of what the pirates wanted. The education would continue until it was successful because 6 months later, the former Crimson Fleet departs the human facility, but they are no longer pirates. Commander Kang Ho now leads a merchant protection service, using his knowledge of pirate tactics to defend trade routes instead of attacking them. His ships are still painted red, but now it represents their commitment to protecting the innocent rather than their history of violence. Security Chief Dal Su has become a freelance investigator, helping local authorities track down criminals across multiple systems. His experience with violence helps him understand the criminal mind, but his rehabilitation has taught him to value justice over revenge. Engineer Hyun Woo now works for a civilian shipyard, designing vessels that can escape pirate attacks rather than equipment that makes piracy more effective. His proudest achievement is a new type of escape pod that can automatically navigate to the nearest safe system when civilian ships are under attack. Dr. Yoon Ha operates a mobile medical clinic, traveling to colonies that lack proper health care. She uses her knowledge of treating combat injuries to help accident victims and her understanding of different alien biologies to provide medical care across species barriers. The young crew members who were most affected by the neural inhibitors report that they don't miss their old lives at all. Communications Officer Minji now works for the Galactic Trade Authority, coordinating rescue missions for ships in distress. Navigation Officer Tae Min has joined an exploration fleet, mapping new systems instead of planning attack routes. But their stories spread throughout the criminal underworld, creating a new kind of legend. Pirates across the galaxy begin to whisper new stories about humans. Not stories of violence and destruction, but stories of an alien species so confident in their military superiority that they prefer rehabilitation to revenge. Stories of weapons, so advanced that humans choose education over execution. The most frightening part of these new stories is their conclusion. Humans are so dangerous that they can afford to be merciful. They don't need to kill their enemies because no one in the galaxy is powerful enough to threaten them twice. As the former Crimson Fleet settles into their new lives, they carry with them a single message that spreads throughout the criminal networks of 3 sectors. Harming innocents is no longer a career option in human space, not because humans will destroy you, but because they will transform you into someone who could never choose to harm innocents again. The galaxy's most feared. Killers now run from humans not because they're afraid of death, but because they're afraid of redemption.